Broadcasting around the world. This is Engineering Tomorrow, the podcast committed to bringing you the best in commercial construction, design, and engineering from the brightest minds in the industry. This is the stuff they don't teach you in school. So sit back, relax, and open your mind. You're about to get the insider knowledge to improve your next construction project or advance your career. This is Engineering Tomorrow.
Hey everybody, we are here today with Joe Parsons, who is the Senior Marketing Sustainability Manager for Climate Control Group. And today we are talking about the huge tax incentives that have been released by and passed by Congress. And I found no one better as it relates to geothermal to talk to about some HVAC credits moving forward for specifically commercial businesses. So Joe, thanks for meeting with us today.
Sure, glad to be here. Always glad to talk about tax credits and
Sure.
geothermal.
So I guess what exactly are these tax credits that have passed for geothermal? Let's kind of just start there.
Okay, sure. Talking primarily about commercial today, so we'll focus there. Yeah, we've had a 10% tax credit for commercial geothermal applications for many years now. What the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 has done for us, it's increased that. So now we have the opportunity to go from 10% to 30% or even beyond. We'll talk about some of the bonus areas as we go through the conversation today. But the way the tax rate is structured now, we basically start out at 6%, but we have the option to do 5 times 6% or get to 30%. And in order to do that, your project needs to be, if your project is less than 1 megawatt, basically a thermal transfer. So if your system is, your cooling load for your cooling capacity of your system is, less than 1 megawatt, or about 284 tons on a project, then you would immediately qualify for 30%. So you get the 5 times bonus. Your project is larger than that, and we're seeing a lot of commercial projects that need more than 284 tons. Then that project, you'd have to use prevailing wage rates and also have an apprenticeship program. And that was included in the bill just really for jobs creation. That was one of the justifications for the Inflation Reduction Act. It's job creation around geothermal systems. So that is the other qualifier. Projects also that started before January 29th, 2023 also would qualify. So there was a ruling that was made basically back in November that said anything that happened within 60 or started within 60 days would also be grandfathered in. So those are really the qualifiers now. But in 2023, less than 1 megawatt or use prevailing wage rates and have an apprenticeship program. That gets to 30%.
That sounds like pretty good tax credit. Have we ever seen anything like this in the commercial space prior to this?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely. It's been capped at 10%. We did have, before we also had accelerated depreciation. We still have that. That makes this, the credits even more lucrative really for commercial applications.
So, okay, we've got this tax credit. I'm a commercial building or even, well, what about like a school? Would they qualify for the tax credit?
Absolutely. And that's something that's new. We really should talk about. Before, in order to get a tax credit, you had to have tax liability. So you have to have tax load, and when you had tax load, you could get a credit against the taxes that you owed. what has happened with the passage of this bill, now nonprofits can also qualify. So this really expands the market. So local, state, local governments, for example, government buildings, even rural electric co-ops now can qualify for the credits. And so obviously schools, K through 12 schools, obviously would qualify. But since there is no tax liability, there's options now for transferability and actually direct pay of these tax credits. So it's basically like you're getting a rebate. It's basically like the Treasury is going to write you a check once your project is completed. So you can use that, those funds to offset the cost of geothermal. You could, use it for really any purpose. So it's really opened up the market substantially, where before lots of projects, were done around schools, but they just couldn't take advantage of the tax credits then. So the payback period with geothermal were good. They were typically in the 5 to 6 year range as far as paying back the incremental difference as compared to the system that would have gone in before. But this is just totally changed the landscape, where you're looking at systems that actually are cash positive in the first year.
When is if I'm and I think we should also mention that this tax credit is for renovations as well. It's not just for new buildings. So if you're looking to replace all your equipment, you could also qualify for that tax credit. Now, let's say I'm in that scenario. I'm either in charge of a nonprofit building or a school, and we're evaluating what heating and cooling system, or we're a commercial building and we're evaluating our heating and cooling options. What's the process? What's the best way to take your typical system, whether it just be rooftop units or whatever, and then compare it to geothermal, and then do the math on if this makes sense or not? Like, how would you recommend going about that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we have a solution for that. So what we've done at ClimateMaster is created what we call a geoeconomics tool. Okay, and this takes into consideration the geothermal product, the efficiency of it, and basically the cost per square foot, for that project for geothermal. And also it takes into consideration whatever system would have been selected for that before. And typically on a commercial building, they've already spec'd in something that's more conventional than geothermal. So you have that number already. Most system designers will understand the cost per square foot of that technology. And if they've done any sort of geothermal design, they also understand, the opposing cost per square foot. So that really becomes the basis of the calculation. But the cool thing about this tool is we baked in all the tax information. So you're going to basically, with the drop-down menu, what type of building it is, where it's located, because that's going to tell you about the state taxes and the federal taxes. All that gets rolled into this calculation. Also, you're going to say if this building is for a nonprofit organization, if it's a C Corp, for example, if it's an S Corp, for example, some sort of pass-through entity, you load that in as well. So all this is done very easily, and you can do this calculation probably easily within 15 or 20 minutes, so that you can get from, I know about geothermal, I've heard it's super efficient, but I've also heard it's super expensive, So this gets you from no to go basically pretty quickly. Wow. And again, it bakes in all the information around the taxes. You tell it also when that project goes in, actually begins, when the project began. So you
Sure.
tell it the year, and you even tell it the quarter where it was started, because that's going to be used to calculate your accelerated depreciation. So all that rolls in. So what you're going to end up with, ultimately, you're going to have a cost for the geothermal system. So you have the overall operating savings, and then you also have the depreciation effect. So cool thing about geothermal, it qualifies as an energy property, and it can be depreciated over a 5-year period, where conventional HVAC equipment gets 39 year straight line depreciation. So that it takes a long time for, the units have already been replaced before they actually depreciate themselves. So with this, you're looking at 5 years. Plus, there's also a bonus depreciation that's baked into the tax bill now, which means in the first year, if you elect to, if you have a tax situation where it's beneficial for you to take that depreciation in the first year, you can take, in 2023, you can take up to 80% of that cost in the first year. It makes a huge difference. You do have to reduce your tax basis by 50% of the tax credit itself. But again, you're looking at commercial applications where this tool will show that you're cash positive in the first year.
Wow.
It's amazing. It's truly amazing to see how quickly you can accomplish this just by plugging in those numbers. Also, we talked about 30%, but there are opportunities to get to 40% or even 50% tax credits now, and this calculator also factors that in. So you're going to tell it, if you didn't qualify, it would pull up the rate of 6% if you didn't qualify for the bonus. But there are ways of getting beyond 30% to 40 and 50. So to get to 40, basically, you're looking at what's known as domestic content. There's still a lot of clarification that's needed around what that project needs to look like to qualify for domestic content. But generally, as an equipment manufacturer, first of all, the product has to be manufactured in the U.S., basically not assembled, but manufactured. So you're taking components and bending, putting things together. So it has to be manufactured in the U.S. And as it stands right now, it looks like the qualifier is going to be, at least for the first couple of years, basically 40% of the cost of that manufactured product in the U.S. needs to be with products that are U.S. made, basically. So you could have a unit that might have a pump that comes from Germany. You have to reduce the overall percentage, by the cost of that particular item. So that's also scheduled to increase over the years, so that I think by 2027, the content is going to be up to like 55%. But it looks like, most of the geothermal systems are manufactured in the U.S. already. All the major manufacturers are here. So it looks like, from a standpoint of the geothermal heat pumps, that part should be covered, without any question. So anyway, expecting more guidance from Treasury coming later in the year on exactly how to calculate it.
Well,
go ahead.
What would you, one more question about qualifying. What if someone says, oh man, there's a 30% tax credit. I'm just going to drill one geothermal well, and then I'm going to add fluid coolers and a bunch of ancillary stuff. What is the actual requirement for that?
Yeah, basically you're looking at 75% of the thermal requirement needs to be provided by the ground loop. I think that's a good way to look at that. And again, I think that was done to, one, obviously we're trying to save energy here. We're trying to, enhance decarbonization throughout the country. So having the efficiency is there. We have systems out there though that, incorporate dry coolers, for example, but they're not there to mitigate the load, the cooling load. They're there basically, and they typically only operate in the winter. So you're basically recharging that ground loop so that any heat that you've dissipated throughout the summer months, you can, bring that. So dry cooler would come on when it's, say, 46 degrees outside or lower. So we're basically recharging that loop, and your loop field stays more constant the loop temperature stays constant and maintains a higher efficiency.
So we've decided we're gonna move forward with geothermal. How much of this project can I include in my total submission for the tax credit? Like, is it just the equipment? Does it include the wells? Does it include the labor to drill the wells? Like, what all is covered under the tax credit that we can submit for?
So geothermal on the commercial side is pretty unique in the fact that the basis for the project includes almost everything related to that project. Okay. And this is, we've had that 10% tax credit. So this is, these rulings have come down over many years. So, 10% tax credit, you basically recount, obviously your loop, the labor to install a loop, the interconnecting piping, the wiring, electrical to support the heat pump operation, any downstream items like, piping and pumping and, air handlers, things like that are included. Even the engineering, and the design work that can be attributed to the HVAC system will be included in the basis of the system. So it's if it covers everything. We're on the residential side, it's some uncertainty, but basically on the residential side, it's pretty much limited to the ground loop and the equipment, and not really covering downstream items like radiant floor system, things like that.
Okay. When it comes to the actual application, are we pre-qualifying ahead of time, or are we doing this project and then just submitting post-project? And then who would you recommend when it comes to the actual paperwork working with to get that submitted?
Okay, that's a really good question. And there are a couple of different answers for it. So if you're in a taxable situation, okay, first of all, you need to be using our calculator to determine, what your exposure is going to be so that you can justify that expenditure. But there's really no requirement for pre-qualification for taxable situations. There's some guidance that has just come out. There's supposed to be some clarification on a call next week in Washington to clarify what is required for those non-taxable entities. So it looks right now that there will be a pre-qualification process for nonprofits. Okay, so you're going to have to file, and the forms aren't available yet, obviously, but what we have learned so far is you'll need to file for pre-approval. You'll be assigned a number basically, which will follow that project through. And then also nonprofits who typically didn't even have to file a tax return will have to file a tax return now to receive that, to initiate that rebate check. Okay, so that's kind of the long and short of it. There are some requirements coming out. We're looking for clarification toward the end of the year, and like I say, some of the tax forms won't even be created until 2024.
Okay. When is the best time to, I guess, if I'm going back to my previous scenario, I'm in charge of construction for this project, or it's mine building. When is the best time to start looking at geothermal, and what trades or entities should get involved? I.e., like, is this at the engineering phase, or do you want to get involved? Do you want to start this at the architecture phase? Like, what's the best time to start this whole process with geothermal? Not only using your tool, but just getting all parties involved, and what parties need to be involved in that decision?
Again, another really good question. The answer is certainly as soon as possible, because obviously with geothermal systems, you have to deal with ground loops. So, there are opportunities during, initial site work for a project. Some of this could start really, long before the construction, process begins. So if you have made your decision to go geothermal and can do some of the installation of the ground loops before, the construction starts, that's always a good thing, because it's much easier to get the drilling equipment in. You're not having to move around, very carefully and set up drills. It's a lot easier to come in. And it's a lot more economical to bring in a commercial driller, so that they can do, some of these projects have several hundred boreholes. So, for them to be able to get in and do that in a production scale is a lot more economical than, coming in after the fact. Also, there's some projects where the loops are actually going under the building, so before the slab is poured. So, during that process, it makes sense to do that. We have a project. It's almost commercial in nature just because of the size of it, but it's a building development in Kentucky, and all of those ground loops are put, under these residential applications, underneath the slab. So doing that, planning ahead, it just makes a lot more sense. It makes it a lot more economical to do that. But you're going to need to involve, your geothermal system designer quickly, so that exactly how much ground loop to install. You'll be really working through, cross-platform through all of the, all the trades and engineering segments of that project. So you're going to need an accurate load calculation, obviously. That's going to roll into the loop calculation to determine how much loop, because that's going to be based on where the system's located. Is it a cooling dominant system or a heating dominant system? All that's going to roll into, making sure that you have enough ground loop to support the geothermal systems.
Okay. I think that is all the questions I had. I mean, I think you did a really good job answering and clarifying a lot of things that a lot of people were wondering about this new tax credit. Is there anything else that you would like to add that we haven't covered today regarding the incentives?
One more thing for sure, because I mentioned before, there's an opportunity to get to 50% tax credit, and I really didn't discuss how to do that.
Okay.
There's a segment of the bill that deals with energy communities, and these are locations that have been where there's been a great deal of emphasis and employment around fossil fuel. Basically, it's called FFE, or fossil fuel employment areas.
Okay.
And if you're in one of those areas, there are a couple of ways of qualifying. So if you're in an area where there has been a coal-fired power plant that's closed, basically after 1999, or if you are in an area where a coal mine is actually closed, I think that the date is at any time after 1995, then you would qualify or could qualify for an additional credit there. So, that's one area. So if your project is in one of those areas, and this is based around a census tract, okay, but it's not just that census tract where that plant was located or that mine was located, but any census tract that was actually adjoining or abutting that census tract would also be covered. So there are maps out there that DOE has put on the internet now where you can actually see this, and you can see census tracts. Typically they're represented in like in dark orange and then a lighter orange in the area surrounding that. And that was done really because again, this is around job creation and putting dollars back into those areas where people who are involved in fossil fuel industry could have potentially lost their jobs or whatever. So you've got those plant closures, you got coal mine closures, and then there are also areas that are what are basically called statistical areas. So you got metropolitan statistical areas, and then you got non-metro areas. So basically rural areas. So these areas, if you have an area that would qualify if there's been involvement in the fossil fuel industry, and if the rate of unemployment is substantially higher than, I give another area basically. So it's really interesting. We put together some maps that illustrate this quite well, and there's a substantial amount of the country that are in these areas. A lot of the coastal areas in Texas, I'd say 50% of the state of Texas would qualify for this. Some areas in the Southwest as well. So it's really interesting that that this could take your tax credit from 40 to 50%. Also, excuse me. Also, if you're building on an area that's been determined to be a brownfield site, also that would qualify for the additional 10%.
Okay. Joe, I want to thank you for taking the time to help us clarify. And where can everyone check out the tool that we mentioned earlier to get your estimations? And then if they're interested in continuing that conversation with Geothermal, who should they reach out to?
So to get the information, just come to our website and go to ClimateMaster.com or ClimateControlGroup.com. Very easy to find. What you'll find there, a link to be able to download the calculator tool. There are also tax credit brochures, both for residential and commercial, that can be downloaded. These are relatively large documents that go through the credits and are really continually updated. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of information that it's coming out piecemeal from Treasury, basically, as to what qualifies, when it qualifies, what are the processes to get that done. So we keep those as current as possible. So those are available for download. And basically, to get more information, I would suggest reaching out to your local, your regional representative from ClimateMaster. If they've gone through the training, they understand the credits, and if they can't get those answers, most have access to also to a presentation or several presentations that we put together. Completed a webinar actually just yesterday, or 2 days ago now, for Contracting Business Magazine. So those presentations are out there and available. And if you need a copy of those presentations to better understand it, those reps can provide you with a copy of that.
All right, Joe. Thanks again. And if anything changes with the tax credits, we will have you back on and hopefully explain that further. Otherwise, everyone, I strongly consider it doesn't hurt anything to just check the comparison with Geothermal. This is, in my opinion, the best time that we have ever seen to install geothermal with the incentives that are out right now. So, all right. Thanks again, Joe.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on Engineering Tomorrow. If you liked the show, please take a moment to subscribe on iTunes or Spotify. For even more great engineering or construction knowledge, visit engineeringtomorrow.blog.